I'm really happy and honored to invite now the President of the Party of European Socialists and former Prime Minister of Bulgaria to give us the message of progressive vision for EU foreign policy. We have talked already this morning on that, and we are very happy, Sergei, that you could make it to come today to our conference and to deliver us the speech as an introduction to our afternoon session, but also as food for thought for the upcoming events we are all doing together, FEPS, the S&D group, and for sure the party. Please, the floor is for you.
Well, thank you very much for the warm welcome, and thank you for inviting me to this great conference. I must say, this is what I call a working style. The surrounding in this library is very inspiring really for fresh thinking and for serious, in-depth debates on all the issues which are on the agenda of your wonderful conference. And I would also especially like to thank Massimo for his commitment and making European foreign policy one of the major priorities of the work of FEPS in the last year. And this is due, of course, to your Massimo's special experience, authority in this sector. And I really believe it is very important because Europe is not only for itself and for our internal problems and challenges, but Europe remains one of the major international factors. Of course, reading the title of the previous one was a different one, European foreign policy destined to fail. It's not very inspiring, but you know, our movement is optimistic in essence, and we believe that things are possible, that we can change the world. Otherwise, simply our movement would not exist, because it would be meaningless. Of course, this is a very interesting time for Europe and for the world, because of the deep changes which happened since 1989, then changes which we are witnessing in the recent years with the global financial, economic, and social crisis, because it really changes the whole international structure of relations, and it puts new challenges to the European Union as well. Wherever you go nowadays, if you are a representative of a European institution, country, political party, people asking you one thing: what is happening with the crisis in Europe? Will you be able to overcome it? And indeed, I think from the point of view of the European foreign policy and the progressive vision, the first challenge is to address in a correct way the internal crisis in Europe, the economic, social, and political consequences which are happening and affecting our societies and our union. Because on the one side, we can see that institutionally, Europe is expected to be much stronger, much more united in our foreign policy, according to the Lisbon Treaty and with the appointment of the High Representative of Foreign Policy and with the establishment of the External Action Service. But the reality is not quite the same, because still most international factors have the feeling that Europe is disunited, that Europe does not speak with one voice and doesn't have clear and common priorities to follow, and that national politics are predominating, both in the European Union and in our external behavior and actions. And Europe really doesn't seem very strong as an international factor. We have to be realists as well. Economically, Europe is not what it used to be 100 years or 50 years ago. Now there are new emerging centers of economic development and progress. And Europe seems smaller, weaker, and some analysts are having very negative predictions about the international role of Europe for the future. But speaking of the current trends which we face in the international relations, I would like to underline three maybe major. First, We are facing a situation when the global neoliberal model of unregulated markets and speculation failed. And this is the major reason for the crisis which all the countries are facing in one way or another. And we need to elaborate global progressive measures and policies to overcome the crisis and to create jobs and fair growth. And this is one of the major priorities for the PES as a political family, and this will be one of the major debates which we shall be having in our Congress in September. Secondly, there are new imbalances in the world. The gap between the rich and the poor nations is growing in the recent decades, and simultaneously there is a new imbalance between the high and low growth economies, which is increasing, and some people are speaking about a G2 world which will emerge from this crisis, meaning the United States and China as the two major powers internationally. Thirdly, as progressive, we must offer a solution to all the global imbalances and global inequalities, because solidarity, justice, equality, these are values essential for the identity of our family. And we don't see foreign policy in terms of realpolitik only. Definitely. Our foreign policy, which we are developing, defending and implementing, should be based on values. If we don't have a foreign policy based on values, we as progressive would lose any sense, and it will make no difference between us and the other political families, especially the conservatives. As I mentioned, there are new challenges and possibilities for European foreign policy. What we can see now is a special focus from the European institutions, especially the Commission, but also the Council and the Member States, stressing on economy and trade in the EU policy. And this is understandable because of the economic challenges which our Union is facing. But we cannot forget, even for a moment, that the European social model, human rights, labor rights, decent work, democracy, climate change, are things and pillars which we have to definitely implement in our foreign policy. And as I already said, there are big expectations, a lot of hesitations, and plenty of disappointment about the role of the European Union currently. In many ways, I believe that the current disappointment with Europe and the skepticism with which everyone is looking at our Union is due to the policies conducted in the recent years by the Conservatives. Because I do believe that the crisis could be addressed in a different way. Now, as a result of the austerity-only policies, Europe, 3 years after this policy has been conducted and imposed on the citizens, the confidence in euro is not restored. The eurozone is very shaky. Economic growth in the European Union is close to zero, and it is even worse in the eurozone. And unemployment is 25 million people. And Europe has become, in many ways, a liability. And if you're not strong internally, you can hardly be strong externally and be a serious international player. What we are now facing are changes which are so deep and crisis which is systematic, unprecedented since 1920s and 1930s, that the only way to overcome all the imbalances is to elaborate an alternative model to the way the world is currently functioning. I know it sounds very ambitious, but I believe that this is the only way how we Europeans can really contribute to positive and progressive changes all around the world. We essentially need a long-term agenda, a global New Deal, which will include in it all the elements, the economic, the social, the democratic, the human rights elements, and this should be the core of the European policy. I also believe that when we speak about the role of the European Union around the world, we should have different circles of priorities. Because currently and naturally the European Union and institutions are developing relations and partnerships with China, India, the United States, everything else. But in the end, I believe that our first priority should be the closest neighborhood of the European Union. Because the EU has a major responsibility to promote peace, stability, democracy, prosperity, social justice, just in the surrounding regions, in the two major directions. North Africa, the Arab world, to say it broadly, and the countries from the Eastern Partnership. And I believe that this is the major test which Europe is facing now, about the possibility to be active and efficient international player. In the past, the soft power of Europe, which is often challenged and compared to the hard power of the United States, NATO, played its crucial role for the transformation of the whole region, the region of the Central and Eastern Europe, the countries which are now the new members of the European Union. And this is, I would say, a very strong success story. All these countries were in communist regimes, planned economy, without free market, with human rights which were violated and suppressed. And now it is a very different picture. Almost half of the countries of the European Union belong to these former communist countries. And this is, I think, a very strong example of the power of the soft power of the European Union, which is based on values and conditionality. I also believe that we are having the same responsibility in promoting democracy, market economy, social justice, human rights in the closest region to the European Union. And we're now facing a big challenge with the Arab Spring. You do remember the huge enthusiasm in Europe and around the world when these revolutions happened. Revolutions of dignity, you can call them in different ways according to the country. Now we are going into another phase, a phase of skepticism, when many experts and politicians are saying, well, this is a very dangerous development because we can have Muslim parties in power everywhere, and actually one regimes which were authoritarian and dictatorships change into another ones which are not more democratic. I must say that there is a big difference between the approach of the European socialists and European conservatives, because we believe in the will of the people from the Arab world to really transform their societies into societies which are fairer, which are democratic, and this process is strongly supported by the PS, by the S&D group, and by FEPS as a very important partner in this respect, and I am expecting FEPS to play even more active role in this respect in our common policy to create a new kind of relationship between the European Union and the countries of the Arab world. Not the relationship of the Union for Mediterranean, which was created by President Sarkozy, which was patronizing and following his political and economic interests, but a relationship of really cooperation, which is based on values, on fair balance of interests, and I think this is a big possibility for the European Union. Speaking of the Eastern Partnership and the other neighborhood regions of Europe, I think that the first of these priorities in the European Union is to continue with the enlargement process towards the Western Balkans. It is hard times, and I must say that many people, after the big enlargement of 2004 and 2007, said, well, it's enough. Let's digest all these new countries so different. Let's change our institutional framework. And it was done with the Lisbon Treaty. Let's change the procedures and postpone further enlargements. We should never underestimate two factors. First, the role of this perspective for the transformation of the countries of the Western Balkans. Because I can tell you for sure, as a person from Central and Eastern Europe, that without the perspective of membership in the European Union, the transformation in Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania would never be so successful. With our failures, but generally speaking, in the right direction. And we should continue the same way towards the Western Balkans. And I'm very glad that Stefan Füle, the Commissioner for Enlargement, is making a real progress and gives credibility to this process. And as a second element are the countries from the Eastern Partnership. I believe there is a big potential in this work, and I believe that it should be further deepened and developed. Although, politically, we don't have too many partners there in these countries. And it will take hard work to identify such partners, to support them, to support the democratic process and transformations in all these countries. And then on the basis of these policies, we can simultaneously also develop our commitments to the other regions. I would not underestimate another very important tool for the European foreign policy. This is our development policy, because Europe is one of the major donors for development for many regions of the world. Somehow, it is not visible, however, and this support is not politically linked and doesn't contain enough conditionality. If you compare the volume of development support and programs of EU and the United States, they are more or less close to each other. But the political effect which the United States are achieving for their policy is much higher than the effect which Europe can and is achieving. I believe that we can achieve many of these goals, again, following our principles. And I can tell you that in the Party of European Socialists, now we are strongly developing our priorities in this respect in the framework, in the foreign policy framework and network of the Party of European Socialists. This will be one of the serious debates at the Party Congress. This will be a very important element of our fundamental program, which is due to be adopted next year in 2013, and which will be the basis for another and very practical political tool, our political manifesto for 2014. And the ambition of the Party of European Socialists is really to show that we have elaborated by then a really different approach, which is global, but which also has clear regional implications and policies based on values and principles, which is consistent and which can be also effective by the goals which we formulate, the tools which we use, and the final results. And in the end of my introduction, I would say that this is a moment of opportunity. The depth of the crisis is a big chance for our family. The societies have changed very profoundly in the recent years, and the public opinion has changed a lot. There is a lot of skepticism about traditional politics. If we manage to differentiate from the conservatives, from the current situation in Europe and in European foreign policy, we can really gain a lot and make Europe and the world better and different. If we don't make it, then someone else will take these possibilities and avail of them. And I hope that your discussion today will be a very serious intellectual contribution to our common aim to formulate such a foreign policy which will make Europe visible, important, aiming at our common goals, and useful for the whole world. So thank you very much, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion.